Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this morning where we're going to be tackling the relatively new subject in terms of its branding of pupil profiling, but the practice of which may very well be something that some of you are already doing, but hopefully we'll still be able to take some useful tips from this presentation on doing. Or if you're not doing it at all, then it might inspire you to start looking at how you could adopt pupil profiling in your own approach to training as well. So we already are at a huge number of people. I've had a lot of interest in this particular webinar, over 150 sign-ups. So that's encouraging that it's a relevant and interesting topic. So we'll just let a few more people shuffle into the back of the class, as it were. Just to test that everything is working that it should be. Olivia's just popped a morning everyone into the chat function there. If people can either via the chat, or you've got the exciting option these days of being able to use emojis, send an emoji of any kind, a thumbs up, a thumbs down, or anything to just let us know that you are here and present. Mariana, is that a raised hand because you already want to ask us a question, or is that just because you touched that button? Let us know. If you've got any questions immediately coming up, or any issues with sound or vision, pop that into the chat as well, and one of us will get on top of that and make sure that you can actually hear and see everyone. I'm going to share the presentation now so we can all see that, hopefully, and not just my face looming at you. And again, if you can see the presentation on your screen, just let us know in the chat or your emojis, just so I can be assured that you're all following it. Great. You're all so very well trained at this already. Okay, so just some introductions to kick us all off. I'm Carly Brookfield. I'm Chief Executive of DIA Group, which is DIA, the membership body and provider of CPD support, all of the things that we do for the driver and rider training industry, and also includes Diamond Advanced Motorist, which is DVSA accredited post-test training and testing brand as well. With me today, I am very excited to welcome back a face which might be familiar to some of you, certainly should be if you've been a DIA member for some time. Olivia Baldock-Ward has come back to the DIA and has hit the ground running, helping us to refresh and develop our training offering to ADIs, as well as being an integral part of our help desk, which is there every day between 9 and 5, and sometimes out of hours when we need to be as well, to offer advice and support on any aspect of your professional career, whether you're struggling with pupils, the DVSA, building your business, whatever the topic is. As long as it's connected to your career of being an ADI and the job that you do, we are there to help give advice on that as well. So Olivia, an experienced driver trainer herself, and has done the whole transition from PDI to franchisee to independent, and now working in-house at DIA. Lots of knowledge in that space. I'm also delighted to be joined today by Sarah Skinner, who also should be another familiar face for those of you who've been in the industry for a while. Not that I'm aging everybody with these comments. Not, accuse me of ageism. I turned 50 last month myself, so I'm in no shape to be going on about age. Sarah is, again, an experienced ADI, has run a franchise herself at one point as well. Many of you will know her from Tri Coaching, and she was an integral part of the development of Tri Coaching, so somewhat of an expert on coaching as well. And she's now part of our help desk and CPD team. So these individuals back in the form, as it were, to help us beef up what we can do to offer advice, training and development to rider and driver trainers across the diversity in which you all train. So that's the introductions over with. I did a little housekeeping at the start for those who had joined us early. Those of us who've just joined us, in your toolbar there, you will see that you've got a chat function and a Q&A function. If we can keep questions for us, for the panel, in the question function, one of us will keep an eye on that, and if it merits interrupting the flow of the presentation, which I'm very happy to do, because we need to capture that thought and deal with it then and there, or that question, ask your questions in there. Otherwise, we'll keep the majority of questions towards the end. So Sarah and Olivia, anything that you want me to pick up on in the flow, then just let me know as usual. Chat amongst yourselves, by all means, make comments, share viewpoints in the chat function, and we'll pick up on those as well as we go. So, share your experiences, what you're doing that works, all of those kind of things. Because not only does that help inform your peers who are on today's webinar, it also helps us in terms of developing the advice that we do, because we ain't got all the answers, and nor do we pretend to. We can just offer guidance, and some of that guidance comes from the experience of ADIs who are on the ground doing this stuff day in, day out at the coalface and have some stuff to share. So, into the actual presentation itself, we're going to run for about half an hour, 20 minutes on the presentation itself, and then we'll allow some time to share questions and experiences. You can pop your question into the question function. We do have the ability to allow you to ask the question live, verbally. Doesn't always work, but if you want to do that at some point, you raise your hand and I will come to you to do that. Probably that bit is best left to the end, just because it doesn't always work as it should. Okay, so pupil profiling, what is it and why are we doing it? Now, we're not expecting people in this respect to become members of the FBI, FBI standard serial killer profiling. That's not what we're on about here. However, there are things to be drawn from that process of getting to know somebody so well that you are able to better design a profile of that person and correlate their learning journey and what you're going to do with them in the training process using that knowledge to fit their individual wants and needs. So pupil profiling is something that is used, in terms of profiling a customer more widely across the spectrum of different industries and different professions. My background before coming to DIA was as a global marketing director for a very well-known private bank, an investment bank. And in financial services, if you've ever worked in that arena yourself, or you have been a client of financial services, you may be aware of a phrase called KYC, know your client. And that is the information gathering process that you have to use. It's a regulatory thing with your clients in financial services to understand them in order to understand the best investment solutions and money management solutions for that person. And there's lots of benefits to that. One, increasing your knowledge of the customer so you can provide the best solution to them. But there's also a compliance and legal aspect to that and a risk management aspect to that. And what I hope to do in this is show you the many benefits of pupil profiling, including which bit can be directly related to things like risk management as much as it can be used as a marketing tool, a teaching tool, increase your ability to build a better client-centered journey to the client's own benefit at the end of that as well. So in essence, pupil profiling is knowing more about your pupils before they get in the car for the first time. And the more knowledge you can gather beforehand, the more that can expedite the design of their individual learning journey and make that time in the car more worthwhile for you and the pupil. When the pupil gets in the car, they've generally got an expectation they're going to be driving the car. If they are sat by the side of the road whilst you gather information, and I'm not saying this is everybody's practice and what they do, some of you do this already, the pre-knowledge bit, but sometimes people do get frustrated because there is so much chat that happens before they set off for the first time. Necessary chat in terms of the briefing, but maybe arguably unnecessary sometimes if it's gathering information about the pupil that could have been acquired before they even get into the car. So we're talking today about that. What is the knowledge that I should be gathering about that pupil? What do I do with it? How do I utilize it in terms of, and also in terms of things like storing it, data protection and all of that? And what is the best way to approach the pupil beforehand to get that knowledge without making them feel like I'm interrogating them. So as we say here, the more client-centered the journey is, the more knowledge you can get beforehand to build a more client-centered journey, the less risky the journey is and the more tailored to their needs, which equals a safer and a better result for all. So what we're going to cover in this session is what is pupil profiling? Done a bit of that already. What information does it deliver and how does that help you? How do I get this information and what do I do with it? And developing your knowledge in this field as well. What other things can you do to improve your knowledge and capacity to increase the amount of this you do in your work? So pupil profiling, as I said, I've just touched on that really. It's a process of gathering more information and insights on your pupil to enable you to deliver a more individualized client journey. It better equips you, the trainer, with the knowledge which may help you service them better as a customer. It's got a pupil output in terms of learning outcomes, but it's also got a business outcome in terms of the more we know our clients before we meet them, the better able we are to not only develop products and services that meet their needs better, but deliver those products and services in a manner that meets their needs better. And it helps manage the risk in training as well. Because if you know more about your pupil before they get into your biggest asset, well, biggest monetary asset, your vehicle, but work with you, the person who delivers the training, the pivot on which your business turns, which is actually your biggest asset in the business, yourself, you want to make sure that you, the pupil, and that big asset and other road users can be kept safe in the training process on road. So pupil profiling can help you identify some of the risks that people may present in the training environment before you even get on the road and risk those assets. So as I said before, this also can be conceived as something along the lines of what we used in financial services and still do, which is KYC, know your client. So, what are the benefits of doing this, what looks like to some extra work? What is the gain that you will get from doing all of this? Well, pupil profiling can, obviously give you some useful intelligence on the pupil's learning needs, their learning style. So we'll talk a little bit about learning styles in this webinar, but I think we've got plans to do specific webinars on learning styles, and it's all integrated in elements of our CPD program anyway. To look at any specific learning needs that the pupil may have before you go into the training journey with them, to maybe look at their experiences pre-driver training that they might have had as a passenger, or whether they've had driver training with another ADI before, or rider training with another rider trainer before, and whether that has built up expectation, nervousness, things that might impact your learning journey with them, and to generally just prepare the ground for your approach to delivering their individual learning journey. Other aspects of that, going back to the risk management perspective of things, is it can allow you to gather valuable information about any medical history or medication they're taking, which could impact their ability to learn to ride and drive and their onward ability to drive on the open road. Gather information about their attitude to risk. There's an element to which you could do some risk profiling into this whole pupil profiling process. And as I said before, it gets a better sense of their attitude to learning to drive and their experiences to date of not just being in a driver training process, but being on the road at all as either a road user, pedestrian or passenger, or somebody who's had some terrible experiences of learning to drive already with another ADI. And that's the first point that I've got on there, so I won't go over that again. Going back to reiterating, enables you to deliver a more individual client-centered learning plan, enables you to flag those risks to yourself and to the pupil, and talk about how that is a risk, and we're going to have to learn to manage that in the learning process. But also, it's good practice for the pupil to know what is their individual risk when it comes to driving. So you're setting him up to be able to recognize and manage that risk when they're an independent driver as well. So this is all about BCTs here, behavioral change techniques, getting them to recognize their own individual risks. What are they going to do about it? And then they can translate that into how they'll drive independently. And it delivers more data to the pupil record and offers somewhat of an audit trail should any issues occur. And I'll give you an example of that early. In terms of professional indemnity and public liability claims, the more evidence that you have run a robust process in which you are delivering training, that you are running a risk-averse process, and that you're trying to manage all the risk, the better a claim can be supported. So if you've got good training records and good pupil records and good risk assessment processes going on, the better it is for you to defend yourself in any claim against you that is about your professional delivery and how you've managed the safety of the process that you are overseeing, i.e. training on road. So, any questions so far, guys, that you think I should answer, or any views you want me to pick up?
No, we've got nothing in the chat at the
Not
moment.
at the moment. No, they're listening. There is a question.
They're all very attentive.
Just So a couple of questions. Sean said, I actively seek student details in advance, as outlined on the current slide. I'm also registered and pay annual fee for data protection at GDPR. How many ADIs are registered and what's the DIA position on this subject? Good question. So yeah, ICO, sorry, Carly, you carry on.
No, you say, Olivia.
Okay, I was going to say that's really great, Sean, that you're sort of thinking along those lines. Things like data protection, GDPR, the Information Commissioner's Office. If you just type that into Google, there's a wealth of information on there for small and micro businesses. And we did a webinar with them. I did one with them some time ago. We'll have to see if that's still available, actually, because that was actually really telling. We had some great questions, great interaction with them, lots of questions asked on there. So yeah, that's great question. People should go on there on the ICO website. There is I know I'm going off a bit of a tangent here, but a bit passionate about this. They need to make sure that, there is a tool, a self-assessment tool, whether you need to register with them or not and pay the fee every year. It's not a massive fee, it's quite small, but, so I would urge everyone to go on there and have a little look at that. I went off at a tangent, sorry.
No, it's a valuable tangent. And there is a mention of the ICO in the slides later on, but it's only a mention. So that's good to get the meat on the bones there. And I'll mention this at the end as well. There is also some new guidance coming out from ICO on the use of CCTV and cameras that was designed actually for the taxi world. So we're a big taxi testing body as well as everything else that we do. And we've been talking to taxi associations recently, and they raised some red flags with ICO about the understandability, for want of a better word, of guidance on the use of cameras. So it's been amended to suit that arena, taxi and private hire, but that has some relevance to our sector. So I'm just trying to get hold of that amended guidance and see if there's anything else we need to amend for the ADI world, the training world, and then we can produce better guidance on that for members as well. But that's me going off on even more of a tangent than you, but more news to come on that one as well. But that's one of the reasons it's useful to sign up to the ICO, so you get those regular updates about how you are compliant or can be compliant with data protection legislation. So any more questions before I move on that you think we need to tackle now?
Not at the moment.
Okay, cool. So what kind of information could I be gathering? And kudos to the Seans of this world who are already doing this, and apologies to those who are already doing it. Some of this will be teaching grandmas and grandpas to suck eggs, so bear with me. So what kind of information could I gather? So a learning profile, i.e. about the individual learner's specific learning needs, learning goals, a conversation with them about why are you learning to drive and how can I help you reach that goal. Medical and health profiles, and I'll go into the bit about that could be an uncomfortable set of questions and how do I handle that. Risk profiling, looking at the pupil's attitude to risk and anything in their history or in their current makeup that could indicate that they have more risk potentially than another pupil in your portfolio of pupils. Previous driver or driving or any road user or driver training history, because again, as we said there, that could be relevant to their attitude to learning to drive. And what other information do we think is useful? So that is, something we can have a discussion about and people can input. What else do we think in your world, in the everyday, is really useful to both information that you could gather to help develop the learning journey, to help you manage risk in your business, but also help you grow business, because every pupil profile that you get contributes to a segmentation and a profile of all your pupils. So it's quite useful in that respect, in terms of what you learn about one customer helps you get more customers and service those customers better. And that's why in marketing, we do a lot of customer segmentation, putting our pupils, yes, into a box in a way in terms of behaviors, but understanding that group of behaviors and that group of people so we can better service people who are like them as well. So in terms of the information gathering side of things, in terms of that learning profile box, we would look at things like any specific needs that pupil had in terms of their learning, as in, do they have any specific educational needs, but also what is their learning style? And we'll touch on VARK to some degree in a moment. Some of you will be familiar with VARK. It's a very good set of profiles of types of learning attitude and need. And some of you, it's a new subject, and we've probably got a webinar on that already, or an article, or it's something that we haven't got and we should put together. Medical health profile, any health conditions, any physical disabilities, any mental health issues, any medication that pupil may be, taking or experiencing in terms of condition that is going to have an impact on learning to drive. The risk profiler, and not just on learning to drive, but on the onward journey of being an independent driver. So you flagging that for your purposes now is useful for the pupil in the future when they drive alone, for you to have highlighted the risk and how that relates to driving. Because just because somebody's got a medical condition and live with it in the everyday and they know how it impacts their everyday, they're transitioning to a new world becoming a driver, and they might not naturally be aware of how that medical condition or that medication impacts how they drive. Risk profiling, profilers out there already exist that will specifically look at driving risk, and they are sophisticated now to the level of type of driver. So there are occupational driver risk profilers, and there are young driver risk profilers out there. Lisa Dawn, Dr. Lisa Dawn, who's very well known in our field, runs a company that offers risk profiles. In fact, she was significant in setting up Driver Metrics, which is one of the more well-known risk profilers in the young driver space. And we're doing some work with Lisa and co on the use of risk profilers and being able to bring those to the industry at an accessible price that they can be used by an ADI regularly should they wish to incorporate that into their screening. But certainly it's a tool that is already used in fleet to some degree. And that's a set of questions that basically are designed to understand the underlying risk attitude of the pupil that extrapolates into their behaviour on road. So they're tried and tested behavioural risk questions that could be used in many a sphere, but they're specifically attuned to how does that impact their behaviour on road. So you could also ask questions about their previous driving history or their previous driver training history, any issues with driving from a passenger point of view, accidents or incidents that they might have been involved in on the road that might give them a certain attitude or nervousness about learning to drive or driving, or any issues with a previous trainer. Particularly at the moment, given this peak demand for driver training, you will be experiencing pupils already been with another trainer. And you're trying to understand what that experience was, to understand where do you go with them in their learning journey and what their attitude may be to you in case they had a bad experience with another trainer. There's cultural considerations that we can try and weed out in a risk profiler that we'll go into in a little bit more detail in a moment, and religious considerations about time of day, attitude to learning, whether they want a male or female trainer, all those kind of things. As we said before, pupil profiling is also useful from a marketing customer service point of view, because it's about understanding your customer and being able to service them better. So what specific customer service requirements does that pupil have? Sometimes in small businesses, I hear people saying things like, I chose to run my own business so I can just suit myself. I think anybody who's running a serious business never uses that phrase, because the reality is you don't just suit yourself. You have to suit your customers if you want your business to grow. We are dictated to by our customers, even if we own our own businesses. But certain clients will have certain considerations and needs that they need you to service beyond the cultural, religious, medical, learning need. They might be practical things like they work and they have certain times that they can and cannot learn, or they're better off not learning because they've just come off a busy day at work and their focus isn't going to be there. So understanding those contexts are important in terms of both servicing them and also to some degree risk management as well. And again, we'll touch on what other information do we think collectively here today is useful to include in a pupil profiler. So looking here at learning goals and the actual driver trainers on the panel here, Sarah and Olivia, and the audience today, feel free to chip in, because I'm not doing this day in, day out. So who am I to talk? So some of the learning goals you could cover in your profiler is, first of all, why do you want to learn to drive? What is the goal? What are you going to be doing once you get that license? If they are just going to be your archetypal 17-year-old whose first learning goal is to be able to go to the McDonald's drive-thru with their friends as soon as they get their license, there may be things that you automatically will want to shape their learning journey towards in terms of both their needs and wants, but also the risks of the type of driving they're going to be. But they may be somebody who is going to McDonald's on a regular basis because they're a part-time shift worker at McDonald's. That means they are commuting to work, and that brings with it a layer of further responsibility and risk as a road user. It may be they're learning to drive because they're going to become not just a new Cat B driver or a new rider through this process. They might be transitioning even more in this process to be becoming an occupational driver straight off the bat, which again begets a whole new area of risks on top of being a novice driver. So understanding the learning goal and the learning ambition is important. It could be they're learning to drive because they are a primary carer and they have the responsibility of transporting somebody and carrying out tasks as a primary carer, which brings with it other dynamics which might impact both their learning to drive journey and them as a driver once they get on the road as well. So this might impact what you focus them on, and in terms of their education around risk as a driver, that might focus some of the learning that you give to them in that process. So I've just kind of, dipped into that there with the example of an occupational driver. They're going straight into that riskier class of driver post-test. Type of work, driving patterns, time of day, type of roads, type of pressure and distraction risks on those people. You might want to focus on that with the get-go, so they understand throughout their learning journey that they are going to be a riskier driver as an occupational driver, and that they are better prepared for that through the learning process and then on to being an independent driver themselves. Cultural and religious considerations, they might affect both the learning process and their attitude to learning as well. And they might also impact how you interact with that customer. So there are particular cultural considerations about, for example, making eye contact in certain cultures is considered bad manners, or it's bad manners to contradict the teacher, or there is a preference of gender of teacher as well. It can also include sometimes in some cultures chaperoning, so another person being present in the vehicle at the same time. Sometimes, obviously, a cultural or religious consideration that you might need to know about in the learning process is the time of day and year that the person is actually going to be learning with you. For example, Ramadan and fasting can have its impact, and we do have to talk about the fact it can be a risk in operating as an individual in the workplace or on the road. So discussing those kind of things in terms of the pupil's own safety and their ability to focus is important for everybody in the learning dynamic. It's a sensitive subject to tackle, and it's to the discretion of the trainer to be able to do that, but they are important topics to be tackled, and giving the pupil a sense of why you're asking these questions and explaining why may make you both more comfortable with gaining that information in the first place. Any questions before I rush headlong on?
We do have some questions, actually. I've been answering some of them. Marcus, for example, he said he's a PDI. He said, gathering information in advance of the first lesson. He said, in my time as a former senior manager and company director, I'm comfortable to do this, but can appreciate it's a skill to be developed if you don't have the experience. So yeah, that's great. A few people asking about, do we have a pupil profiler? The answer is yes. We have made one for you, so we can share that. Could you elaborate more on risk profile, please? Denise has asked. Not quite sure, Denise, if you could just be a little bit more, is there a certain aspect of that, a bit more specific, perhaps, that we could help you with? Coralie has asked, how obvious are the profiling questions, i.e. how easy would it be to lie or deceive? That's an interesting one.
Okay, let me take that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. There is no complete safeguard about somebody lying on a risk profiler. And it happens, by the way, in the financial arena with KYC. So, for example, a bank will traditionally, an investment bank will traditionally be using KYC to know their customer, but also to manage their risks with regard to that customer. So one of the types of customer you're not really supposed to take on in an investment arena in the UK is a PEP, a politically exposed person, because they can cause risk for the institution and the underlying clients and assets of that institution. So, for example, hopefully not offending anybody on the call here, but this is a known screening process in UK banking. Russian clients are always treated to some degree as politically exposed clients. So you would be screening very carefully for where their assets came from. You're not being used for money laundering within that investment organization, all those kind of things. So but even then, because some of those clients know that they are politically exposed and a risk, they will still lie on their forms. And it's the art of weeding out and doing even more due diligence there to understand whether that's a lie or not. There might be times when you see these risk profilers or these profiling forms come back, and it's sparking a question in your mind. You might want to explore that with the pupil in a little bit more detail. But it's that 80-20 thing for me. I often have conversations with DVSA about, why they haven't done something around a new screening thing or a new checking thing. And they'll say things like, well, that could be open to fraud and blah, blah, blah. The whole system of identifying checks, having a passport, having a driving license, all of that is open to fraud. There will always be somebody who can cheat the system. And for that 20% that cheat the system, I wouldn't not do it because it benefits the 80% having that thing in place. So you've just got to be vigilant. You've got to trust your gut. If you have questions that you are triggered by a sense that that person's not being honest, I would interrogate a little bit further. And you've always got the default option of not taking that pupil on board at all if you think that they are already being dishonest in the process. Sarah, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I mean, when I was with Lisa Dawn in a previous existence, we did a risk profiler for a group of driving instructors, and they were filling it in. And lots of them came back as deceptive, that their answers weren't honest.
Mm-hmm.
And that is because all of the driving instructors were trying to answer the questions in the way that was absolutely exact and correct. Do you ever find yourself going over the speed limit? All the driving instructors are saying, no, absolutely not, never, never. Not even once in my whole driving instructor career kind of attitude, because they're trying to give this persona that they are the perfect example for their pupils, rather than actually answering the questions with true honesty. So these profilers are actually equipped to flag and highlight when people are being deceptive. So if they are just answering the questions how they think they should be answered, rather than answering them genuinely. It's all back-end algorithms and goodness knows what, but
it's psychometric
it does show.
testing.
It is psychometric testing.
When some of you here will have been in the civil service or been part of organisations that did recruitment that involved screening using psychometric testing. I certainly had to do prism profiling, prism as in a refractive thing. When I went into financial services, and I remember thinking I was clever enough to respond to those psychometric profiles in a way that made me look good. And actually, they're very clever, and they revealed my true attitude to projects and work and understanding and how I work with colleagues, and it's very insightful. But you can't cheat them unless you actually design them yourself to some degree. But the risk profile though is slightly different to the pupil profile that we'll share with you today, the questionnaire we put together. And that's why I think that giving ADIs access, so they should choose to use it. It's to industry standard risk profilers like Lisa Dawn's outfit can offer would be very interesting. And we're having conversations with her at the moment about opening up that access to make it more accessible to ADIs. And I think, ladies, if we flag up, let's get Lisa on for a webinar specifically to talk about the risk profilers that she has been involved in developing, because she's way knowledgeable on this subject. I've used risk profiling technology in financial services, and I've seen how it operates in the driving arena, and we're obviously using those on the Milestones project for Young Driver. But she is the person who helped create those, so she's the best person to talk about it.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I think there's always going to be somebody who's going to try and cheat a system, and you will either get a gut reaction to that, and you can choose whether you continue to engage with that pupil or not. And it's a risk in itself if somebody's being dishonest with you from the get-go, whether you actually have any business with them. But there are also some underlying other questions and approaches you can take from that sense of unease and go back to that pupil and ask further questions. Client servicing considerations I've already touched on to a certain degree. So if you're operating a business, you are there for your clients. They are your masters to some degree. However independent you think your business is and however much you control your own destiny, without customers, we don't have a business, and servicing them is important and giving them what they need. Obviously, we're not saying be run ragged by your clients, but understanding what it is they need and when they need and how they need it to be delivered to them is really important. So things like the time of day or week they prefer to learn in, the time of day, the type of lessons, are they looking for a single, a block, a 1 hour, 2 hour, an intensive approach to things, getting to know how they would like to consume your product. How would they like to pay is useful at that point, understanding, do they want to pay by installment? Do they want to pay, upfront? And actually, through gathering some of this information, that can help you manipulate the customer to some degree by offering them solutions that you're using their intelligence that they're giving you to be able to sell them stuff that you want them to have. Is there anybody else that needs to be involved in the learning process? So is there anybody that will need to be updated, like parents, or is there any need to interact with the parents in any way? Where do they want to be picked up? Very simple stuff like that can be included in the pupil profiler. So you've got one questionnaire that goes out that gathers information that is intelligence for designing a learning journey, but also as intelligence for how you will deliver the product to that person and interact with that person on a daily basis.
Just before you go on, Carly, sorry, Hilary has asked, or should always ascertained such info as whether the pupil is a morning or an evening person, VARK, shy, confident, culture. Is it wise to make notes to show that I've done this in case of any incidents?
Yes. And that's where it goes back to managing the other risk, though, but of keeping and making notes on pupils' profiles about how you manage that data and keep it secure. Because the more information you gather, the more risk you have about the data that you hold, because the data is becoming more and more personal, the more intelligence you gather. So you have to safeguard that data better because there's a risk to holding that information. But just going back to, because we don't really cover it in this particular session, we refer to it. The learning styles thing, the VARK thing, is all about whether they are a visual, I can never pronounce it, kinesthetic.
Kinesthetic.
Kinesthetic. It's like an American trying to pronounce Worcestershire. And an auditory learner. So whether you're the type of learner who learns through looking at a video and processing information through there, whether you prefer to sit down and read text and make notes and you draw your information from that process, whether you're somebody who needs to listen to something and that's like a podcast or whatever, and you learn better from there, or are you combinations of these things as well? So I think if we haven't done something on VARK for a while, it might be another, giving you more jobs to do here, but it might be another special webinar that we need to look at, is going through that, because let's face it, the ADI qualification has many gaps, and this is one of them, understanding different learning types. And I think that would be useful to do something on that. So yeah, the information that you're gathering is building up that picture of, is somebody needing to learn in a very specific way with you? And as part of that knowledge of them about, if they're a teenage boy, for example, and all that going back to Neanderthal times where boys will sleep later in the morning and stay up later at night, which is challengeable, actually. That's something that's been held in educational circles for a while, that actually boys and girls learn differently, and some of that to do with sleep patterns, and it goes back to the hunter-gatherer days where men would be up all night hunting and sleep during the day, and women would be up early tending the campfires and all that kind of thing. I've got a 14-year-old girl, and that goes out the window, because in that respect she behaves like a Neanderthal male. She's up all night and sleeping throughout the day. But there are things that will impact their learning based on their behavior in the day-to-day, and what is a good point for them to learn during the day or evening, and what is not a good point at all because they're too sleepy first thing in the morning and they're easily distracted. However, there's an argument on from that says, well, that's going to be their risk. And they are going to be driving in the morning from time to time, particularly if they get a job or shift working or whatever. And actually, we might want to shake them up and prepare them for having to drive at those times, but make sure that part of their learning journey is understanding their risk of driving early in the morning and how they're going to manage it. So we should prepare them for that eventuality rather than saying, oh, let's not teach them till 3 o'clock in the afternoon because they're safer then. 3 o'clock in the afternoon might not be safe for them, because if they're in sixth form or they're doing their A levels, not GCSE, but or college study, just after a whole day of learning, are they best adjusted to learning at that point because they've just had a whole day of having to focus? So there's all those different things that collude to give you a better sense of the pupil and what their learning needs and the safety needs are of managing that particular pupil. Moving on to the how do I get this information? Obviously, it's not mandatory for somebody to complete these questionnaires. You could consider making it mandatory as part of your terms and conditions of your specific business. But then you've also got to question how uncomfortable does that make a new customer when you onboard them. So probably voluntary information is a good way to start with this. If you are so worried about the risk management aspect, again, there is an argument to make it mandatory or certain questions mandatory. And if you want, as I said, you want to make it mandatory, it's best to put that into your T&Cs. You do need to make it clear to pupils, particularly in the areas that it may be discomforting for them. They don't need to supply that information in every section. And, things like medical conditions or medication they are taking might not be a point of comfort. However, the flip side of that argument again is there are specific medications that will have an impact of them behind the wheel. So you may want to make aspects of your questionnaires mandatory and other areas voluntary if it's where you feel the risks are to you and your business as well. So you can have a pupil profiler that has sections that are mandatory and sections that are voluntary. They're just useful to know. It's not pivotal to safety or designing learning journey that you have that information. You can add context why you're asking the question, and that's always useful by having standard notes underneath the section. So for example, if you identify key medications or medical conditions that have an impact on somebody behind the wheel in your car and onward being a driver of their own vehicle, you can stipulate what those conditions and medicines are, pharmaceuticals are, and put that underneath an explanatory note. The reason we're asking you this question is because certain medications can cause drowsiness or whatever. These medications include. Please note if you are taking any of these medications at this time. And then the same thing with asking them questions about specific educational needs. You could have a little explanatory note in there that says, the reason we need to understand this is because blah, blah, blah. And then I think once people start filling out questionnaires and they see why are we asking you this information bit, we feel a little bit more comfortable in giving you that information. And that's something that I've experienced in KYC processes. You will get people say, well, why do I have to give that information? If you explain it well, they'll give it you. If you say just because you have to, they will be more reticent with sharing that information. And then knowing if there's anything you do to accommodate specific needs in learning, such as cultural, religious, is valuable, as we've already covered that point anyway. We've actually designed a questionnaire. This is the difference in terms of not just learning styles, but delivery styles. I've done this presentation before and promised everybody I'd do a pupil profile afterwards, and I didn't get around to it. I am a talker. Olivia is a doer because she's been back with us for like a month or so, and she's already developed the pupil questionnaire for members to be able to use. So she's pulled together something that is an example that we will share with people after this webinar. We'll send it out to people. That is a sample of what we would say is a useful start. You may want to take that and take it to the nth degree, and you might have some inputs for us about how we could improve it. Very glad that you tailor that to your own needs within your own organisation, or you give us some feedback about what other questions we could have on there, or feedback on how we ask the questions. And this is the better way, because nothing is absolutely perfect the first time you birth it. It needs some work, as any parent of a 14-year-old girl will tell you. So simple questionnaires, keeping it as short as you can do, but not getting too hung up on, oh, I can only have 10 questions or people start losing interest. This is an important process and it's important information. This is not a marketing survey where you'd like to know, their certain tastes and desires. This is important information for designing the learning journey and for risk management. And explaining that when you send it out to the pupil, the why are we doing this and why do I need this information for you bit is as important as the survey itself. It can be paper-based if you're still on paper-based records and paper-based gathering, or just for ease, you might want to do it on paper in the car. So you get them to fill it out. As I did say, don't do this before, do this before they get in the car, but sometimes if that's not possible, get them to do it there. And then you just basically go home and input that information in whatever customer, a CRM or pupil management system or set of files that you run on your pupils. The best way though is to do it as an e-survey. So send it out to the pupil. Obviously, 17 to 25-year-olds, typical Cat B learner type, and Silver Surfers increasingly are now digitally savvy and they are happy to fill out forms. They're forced to fill out forms for everything else, from banking to NHS services or whatever. So digital surveys are useful because the customer is able to use digital means now, but it also is more useful for you because it captures the data and also can be used to crunch the data sooner and put it with your records than the paper-based versions. There are a number of surveying tools out there that you can use to develop questionnaires. They're not just survey tools to run feedback surveys. They have lots of different templates in them that you can manipulate to turn it into a pupil profiling questionnaire. So some of the free open source ones that are out there are things like MailChimp. You might already be using MailChimp to do all of your mailings, and they have a survey function within that. People who have got a customer base of less than 1,000 users can use things like MailChimp for free. Obviously, you start paying the more customers that you've got in your MailChimp account that you're interacting with. There's also things like SurveyMonkey, SurveyShack. There's lots of tools out there that do essentially the same thing of survey templates, letting you build a survey, and then it will run survey reports for you in terms of you being able to crunch that data and all. So then that's useful because you can have a look at individual pupil records, but you could also look at some trends amongst your pupils as well.
On that thought, Carly, it would be very interesting to have things like, how did this pupil discover you? Because then, obviously that can affect on how you advertise in the future. If you find out that none of your pupils are coming to you through the advertising that you're doing and they're all coming through a different source, for example, social media or TikTok or whichever it may be, it means that you can focus better on where you need to attract your clients because that's where they're finding you.
Yes, and the reason I didn't stipulate that particularly as a question, and it should be a question in there, is an arrogant assumption actually that any business, in your very first interaction with any customer, you should be asking, where did you hear about us? How did you come to find me? Because the number of businesses I've been into that assume they know what their customer source is and the marketing channel they've come through, and therefore spend a lot of time and money in that marketing channel, who, when you actually do the research, it delivers some surprising results that actually your customers are coming through here and you're doing something good to be there right now, but you could do something even better if you knew that that was your main channel. It's unbelievable. I'm talking about big brands that I've gone through their data as a consultant and gone, did you realize most of the customers came from here, not here where you've been spending millions of pounds of advertising?
Exactly.
You're achieving this customer base through doing very little here. Just imagine if you switched at even half your spend to here, or your time and effort, it'd actually save you costs and deliver you more customers. So, exactly. Getting information.
And very important at the moment as well, while we are in boom time with plenty of pupils, that time, the curve will happen and it will slow down. And it's very important that you know in advance where your best source of pupils is, rather than that presumption that you already know.
And I would ask the question, if they say through a friend, ask them if they don't mind sharing the name of the friend, because that could be a key referrer, and building up a network of key referrers and considering whether you should additionally be rewarding key referrers. So, for example, you find out somebody has referred 5 pupils to you in the last 5 months. I would maybe send them a little something because they're clearly a good ambassador for your brand. and
Absolutely.
they've saved you on some marketing costs there. So you can set. We speak in another webinar that we've done on marketing about setting up referral networks and rewarding people who are referrers and encouraging people to be referrers by offering an incentive. We do it. We have a member get member scheme, and it's worth spending some money paying people who bring members to us up to £25, I think it is at the moment, to refer a member to us. Some pupil management apps that are on the market already, like Total Drive, may have an element of this data collection in them already, but we are actually working with one of those apps at the moment to integrate pupil profiling questionnaires into their suite of products. They're going to hopefully be offering a free version of their app to DIA members exclusively. And one of the things that we'll add to that for a trial period, just to see how it works well, is going to be a pupil profiler template, and that will collect the data and pull it into pupil records, which is why people use that particular system, is to manage their pupil records online as well. Thomas, I saw your hand up. I'm happy to come back to you at the end if you want, or you can pop a question in the Q&A and I'll answer that. But raise your hand again in a moment and I'll come back to you if you want to still ask me a question. When should I pupil profile? Obviously, I think the earlier you can get this information, the better. So that first phone call or email inquiry, one of the first things you can do is send them the questionnaire and ask them, to fill that out at their convenience. When you look at some of the key types of questions that we'll be asking, focusing on any particular adaptations that are needed to learning, or the vehicle question about medical history, you can see why you would want to know that information before they get in the car with you, the massive asset in your business, and your car, another massive asset, and to manage the risk to other road users, that person being in your car as well. So those type of questions are pivotal. And even sometimes you have to say to somebody who you're chasing before that first lesson, listen, if you could only just fill in that bit right now, that'd be useful, and we'll do the rest later on, because this is a really important bit, explaining the why again and the benefits of doing it. I'm sure you get them to do that bit as well. And again, if you come knocking on the door of making a claim under the PIPL, one of the first pushbacks we're going to have is, have you got any training records? Have you done any risk management? Can you demonstrate risk management within your business? Because to support the claim and defend it legally, the more evidence we have of your risk management processes, the better. So these questions are useful and prepared to teach a new client and design their learning program as well. And even if you don't want to profile the pupil from the point of inquiry, certainly once you've agreed to take them on, as in they've paid you, you've arranged the first lesson time or when the block of lessons is going to take place, you want to start getting that questionnaire out in advance of that first lesson, because that's you start to prepare their learning journey. So again, explaining that, I'm not just trying to gather data on you here, like your inside leg measurement, because I'm a curious or a stalker or whatever. I need this stuff to give you a better learning journey, to make sure that we are delivering to your learning goals and your learning needs. So make the sell of why this data is important in their interests, not just in yours. It could, going back to that specific needs, cultural needs, whether it's male or female trainer, where they might have specific needs that you might not be able to cater for. Olivia, hit me with it. What is the element of the national standards unit?
Oh God,
because you're the national standards bureau. That basically,
don't put me on the spot like that.
No, actually, put it in the presentation.
I'm googling it.
No, it's all right. Unit 2, the national standards. I thought I'd just quiz you, because you are the national standards guru. That bit in Unit 2 that talks about when a pupil's learning program and needs outstrips your competence. There is no shame in admitting you are not the person for that customer, or you're not the organization for that customer. A good advisor, a good business will do that. They will say, we can't offer that service to you. However, here's somebody I know that is better attuned to your needs. And that customer will appreciate your honesty and go to the other provider, but you might not have lost the sale, because they will remember that you gave them the advice to go to the customer. And when they've got people that might suit you more, they will be more likely to recommend you as the person that referred them on, as well as the organization that they're working with. So if you, through this profiler, get an understanding that this pupil is not for you and you are not for them, that can help you be compliant with Unit 2, where you need to transfer the learner to an appropriate colleague where their learning needs, can be better met. And this could be to do with a pupil who's got fixed physical and cognitive disabilities, which need adaptation in the learning process, and you haven't got the suitable vehicle to do that or the wherewithal. Could be beyond your professional knowledge at that point, and you feel more comfortable handing them off to somebody. It could be the simplicity of you're a male trainer, they want a female, or you're a female trainer and they want a male trainer, or there's somebody who would actually prefer to be with somebody who is more attuned to their needs in any respect of gender, non-binary, or whatever. So it's understanding this could be very useful in whether you are the right person for them or they are the right pupil for you. And certainly once you've agreed to take on a pupil, as I said, reiterating that point, that's the point at which you should send out that questionnaire and start gathering this information. Data protection considerations, as I said earlier, although this is designed to some degree mitigate risk, drive down risk, or at least understand risk more of that individual so you can mitigate their risks, there is risk implicit in doing it, as in you're gathering much more personal information on that pupil, so you have to know how to store it and manage it properly and safeguard it. So it is classed as personal data. Any information the pupil supplies that is personally identifying is personal data. So you as the business are deemed as the data controller for this information. And so therefore you have to safeguard it. And something, it's not always the case that public professional indemnity claims are made about mistraining or misadvice. They are often made actually about the use of data and data being leaked either intentionally or unintentionally to third parties, and that breaching that person's DPA. And claims can be in excess of 30, 40, 50,000 for DPA breaches, and they are leveled at small individual businesses. The consumer who feels the value of their privacy and their data is crucial to them does not care that you are a small driving school. They believe that you should have been on top of this if you operate a business and you're processing data, and that you have done the professional things you should have done to protect that data. So they're not going to worry about placing a claim against you that could destroy your business if you haven't got the benefit of a professional indemnity policy that helps you defend those claims. And not always will that indemnity policy pay out for that purpose, because it may be found that you have made serious, lack of care in running your business to allow that to happen. So everything you can do to shore up that, protection of you, your business, and your pupils is really important. So determining what data you currently hold, adding in the fact that gathering more data means more responsibility, and developing the extent of the data you hold and determining what you do with it very much makes you the data controller. So you need to be aware of your responsibilities and obligations that this brings with it. So this is why we'd recommend you head over to DIA Academy and listen to the webinar that we have on the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, or visit the ICO's website, read the information and advice that's on there, but register with the ICO as well. I think it's about, is it still about 35, may have gone up with inflation, £40 a year.
It's like 40, 50-ish around.
Yeah. And that's an important piece in this jigsaw puzzle of showing that you are a responsible business owner and operator. And there's the link there for reaching the ICO, but it's basically just ico.org.uk, and there is guidance on there on the general data protection regulations and Data Protection Act and how you have to be compliant with it as a small business as well. As I said, we've been talking to other associations that we work with in other elements of our business, and they have given some really useful feedback to ICO about how some of their advice would not be deemed clear English. And if you're trying to understand this minefield of data protection, it's not always the clearest information. And there's been some radical rewriting of the stuff around in-car cameras and use of that data, and as well, and personal data, to make it more plain English. So, and I think there's probably some other work to be done in all areas of ICO's work on there. So, but if you do that and you look at it and it's not really that easy to comprehend, always give us a call and we'll help you, understand your own individual responsibilities and how you manage those. So There are many risks in driver and rider training, from other road users, weather conditions and contexts, even who'd have thought the black swan event of a global pandemic that we never thought would ever have the impact that it did. But one of the biggest risks in your business is you and your pupil. And if you can manage those risks, of that pupil risk in particular, through learning more about them and designing processes that help you meet their needs, and deliver satisfaction to the customer, but also help you manage the risks, then you're onto a winner to some degree. So that alone, that risk management aspect, I think is one of the strongest benefits of doing pupil profiling. But the other massive benefit is KYC, knowing your client so you can service them better and get them a better outcome, and also a better outcome for you as a trainer as well. And we talk a lot in this industry about client-centered learning, but are you being truly client-centered unless you're profiling your pupils before you even meet them in the car in the context of training? And I think that's a one for discussion, but my own personal belief is, unless you've sought to understand that customer before you get in the car, I don't know how you've necessarily designed their individual learning journey. And there is so much you could do off-road that is better for the on-road universe, and developing that in a way that meets the customer's needs quicker. Not to say we're putting the pressure of speed on the learning process, but the more things you can do off-road to support that journey, the more time on road is spent in a much more valuable way. So, questions that we haven't already answered, comments that people are making that we need to pick up, queries?
Just to go back to Denise, she asked about in terms of risk profilers, and we asked her to a little bit more specific, and she said about the attitude, a pupil's attitude to risk in particular, sort of example of possible questions. So Denise, on this example, it's like a starter document, a starter bunch of questions that we're going to provide you. It's for you to sort of go away and develop, or come back to us as part of your DI membership. The help desk is a benefit, so come speak to us about any questions about helping to develop that further. But as Carly said, we'll try and get more expert opinions on this later on risk profilers on another webinar. But it's something which we have included a question on there about that. But yeah, if there's something that you really want to know a bit more about now, then perhaps, give us a call, give us an email, and we can always chat to you individually about how you might develop that a little bit further at this point. But that is just as our example is just exactly that. It's an example just to kind of get the ball rolling with you guys. Hope that's okay.
The driver metrics one, which Lisa Dawn was pivotal in helping develop, she has her own company now doing this, and driver metrics is a separate product, but we're using driver metrics for the milestones trial, the young driver trial. That is specifically calibrated to young driver risk. So what it does is it gives scenarios that are not necessarily related to driving, and asks the pupil what their preference is. So as we know, the development of a young driver, or somebody who's in the 17 to 25-year-old range, puts them in that category of their thinking ability is still developing, all to do with that frontal cortex not having developed to the extent that it will do post 25, the connective tissue is still forming, and that impact that it has on thinking processes in terms of risks. So making them more prone to take risks, more prone to seeking thrills as a form of reward or pleasure, and their inability to understand how risk can impact them and those around them. So some of the questions that are in there are giving them scenarios and asking them to express how they feel about that, and asking them to understand to do you like speed, basically, but in much better terminology of that. Does it give you a sense of a thrill? And do you like taking risks? And in this scenario, what option would you choose? So it's trying to get to that innate attitude of that person to making decisions, particularly risky decisions. And it is very much based on that understanding that we have, that young people in particular struggle to recognize risk, assimilate risk, and know what they want to do about it. And also their proclivity to want to do risky things because it gives them a sense of reward and thrill and pleasure. So that's what the risk profile will look at in more detail. In more the occupational risk profilers, that has the additional context of the type of environment you drive, the pressures of the customer or the boss or the company. As in, we have this BS in fleet that all these big organizations, particularly the delivery ones, like the supermarkets, sign up to lots of fleet training and occupational driver education. But then they're still putting that massive pressure on the driver in terms of delivery, number of drops per day, time that they have to get around their rounds, that kind of thing. So some of that is built into risk profiles as well, is, what's your own attitude to risk and how much pressure do you put yourself under to deliver in your job, and how will that impact your risk as a driver? But equally, are there external things that alter your risk? And that goes across really to the GDE as well. The God, I've completely menopausal brain here. GDE is the Goals for Driver Education matrix, where we recognise in modern driver education that actually it's the higher elements of the GDE that are more important in terms of things that impact our behaviour and decision making. So risk profilers are designed to take into account some of those key impacts on our driving risk, context, other road users, other influences in our sphere, how we're driving, what purpose are we driving for, all those kind of things as well. But more detail to come on risk profilers. What specific things are they asking, and how do they use that information to give an idea of risk? Any other questions or hands up or anything like that? I know we're 5 minutes past the hour, but happy to ramble on if people want to ramble on with me.
Let me just have a look.
Any comments? I haven't kept an eye on the chat myself. I've been making everybody else do it.
Yeah, I mean, someone asked about on the first lesson, someone showed possible signs of drug use, and they were asked and they denied. However, their ADI is not convinced, so offered a drugs test on the next lesson, which they're happy to take.
Yeah, I mean, look, people feel uncomfortable about asking questions, don't they?
Yes.
But what's more uncomfortable? Asking the question and trying to get to an answer that may benefit you and the pupil and other road users, or ending up in a wall because the pupil was high or is going to be high during the training process. I would worry less about the discomfort of asking the question and hopefully getting the reward of the answer that can help me cut my risk than I would, I would worry more about the potential for risk by not asking the question. This is a killing machine we're putting behind the wheel of, and to allow them to operate it with this mistrust of whether they're on drugs or not is foolish at best, deadly at worst. So I think you can include, if you want to, it's at your discretion, questions about, are you or have you taken any class or whatever, B whatever they are at the moment, drugs. And you can also include in that questionnaire, by the way, even if people don't want to answer it, you can use the questionnaire to educate people about risk. And when I went on about that, there's little disclaimers under each section. In the medical and use of drugs, you could widen it out to medications and use of other drugs. You could say, are you taking any medications prescribed or otherwise at this time that you may think will have an impact on driving? In your little disclaimer underneath, you could explain the standard prescribed medications or off-the-shelf medications that have the impacts, or refer them to a link online they can look at. But you could also have another little line there saying the impact of non-prescribed illegal drugs can have an impact on driving that can be deadly. And that is why we would like to know about that as your instructor. We're not the police. We're not going to report you. However, we need to be mindful of the fact that if you've smoked a ton of weed the night before, that is going to impact my life and your life and other road users the next day. And I'd always require that, information before we do that with you. That's helping me to manage your risk and vice versa. So I think that's a very good point, that if you gather some intelligence by one way or the other about a pupil in that respect, then manage the risk of that the right way and either refuse to take them out, or you've got to look at delaying lessons until the time at which you think that that person is able to deal with that, or you just don't deal with that pupil at all. Any other questions that people have? There's been some, hey, everybody else look at the chat, because in that spirit of sharing is caring, and learning from your peers, there are some members here on the chat who have been dropping in some useful links like the one to our webinar. Thanks guys for doing that on the ICO, and also sharing their experience and advice as well on this matter. And again, you know, we're all in the learning journey here. So input your experiences to DIA directly on using pupil profiles, questionnaires, call them what you will, and what are the questions you would suggest we add to this standard profiler that we've compiled as a starter profiler, and also your experiences of using them, what benefits that's derived for your business, as well as the pitfalls. You know, how have you handled those tricky situations around asking for certain information and the pupil not wanting to divulge it, or suspecting something about the pupil but not being able to ask them directly? How have you managed that process? So, you know, always share with us that information as well. You'll receive the questionnaire by email probably after this webinar, I would have thought, Olivia, in the next couple of days.
Yeah, I've got Matt
from this webinar to add to it.
Yeah, I've got Matt on it. So all the ICO and all the backdated webinars are in DIA Academy under the webinar page. So I've been putting like little things in the chat, to little links and things like that. Someone did say, you know, how do we get all these links and all this information afterwards? I say just drop us a quick email, support@driving.org, and happy to just whiz all those bits over to you or chat with you, whatever you'd like.
We're going through the Academy and backfilling any webinars with a PDF of the presentations as well over time. Obviously, we've been doing webinars for quite a while now, so we're going back, and so we can publish the presentations alongside the webinars. The only time we might not be able to do that is if it's a third party and they didn't want their specific full presentation sharing. And obviously, it's worth remembering that anything that we're producing here, we have to be sensible. We do have copyright on those presentations. It's very flattering when I see other associations and other expert trainers, and you absolutely know that that's our presentation they're using. If you're going to use it, at least keep our copyright on it, or at least attribute us to the source. And there's not 100% originality even in our presentations, but there is some original thought in there that we'd like to at least be credited with. You're obviously welcome as a DIA member to use that questionnaire template. We've delivered that as a benefit to our members. But thank you so much for everybody. Do you know what? I've only gone 10 minutes or so over time, which is somewhat of a record for me. I'm normally about 30 minutes over time.
You're doing well.
Thank you. Thanks to Sarah and Olivia for joining us today. Thank you to all of you for giving us what I know is very precious time at the moment, given the demand for your services. Just to let you know, whilst you're on the call, quick mop up, we have written to DVSA this week. I'm currently the chairman of the National Association Strategic Partnership, the steering group of the industry, which is the three main associations of the industry. So I've written this week on behalf of NASBAN, but on behalf of DIA, to DVSA to signal our very severe and ongoing concerns about the management of test supply at the moment. The letter, which we're giving them the right to reply for the next couple of days, but then we will publish the letter, is our own thoughts that we've had throughout this process about what more could be done, and our own dissatisfaction, to say the least, about the management of this whole crisis. But it is also specifically gathering feedback from a survey that we launched a couple of weeks ago, asking you what you think of the 7-point plan to tackle driving test waiting times, and whether you think any of those measures or each of those measures is going to have an impact, but also asking you what more they could be doing, what other measures they could be taken. I think that survey is still live. We've had over 700 responses to that within the first week. So that shows you the level of concern that people have. But if it's still live, then please do fill that in, because the more of you telling us what you think, the more that we can go to DVSA and say, hey, this isn't just Carly Brookfield with her big gob again saying what she thinks. This is what the members, the people at the coalface, are actually thinking. So as I said, we've detailed a few things in there around our concern that some of their measures are too slow fire and won't have the impact in a timely enough manner. I think the key headline to take away from that is what we've already said in our magazine and in webinars. You know, we are We are 4 months into a 7-point plan to tackle driving test waiting times. At the 3-month point, waiting times went up to 21.3 weeks. As Sarah rightly pointed out to me the other day and gave me some useful goes to the mill, in October 2021, Loveday Rider wrote to all of you and said that 15 weeks was an unacceptable waiting time and that they would drive it down. We are now at 7 weeks more than that 15 weeks, nearly 4 years on from lockdown ending. And the plans ain't working. And we're 4 months into the 7-point plan, and that's not necessarily the impact either. So I know people chat in forums online, what are DIA doing? What are this person doing? Whatever. We are writing to the minister. We are writing to DVSA. We are not just complaining. We're offering ideas of solutions as well. And we're gathering the voice of the industry and things like these surveys. So it's important for you to take part to make sure that we highlight the issues as well. We're also writing to DVSA's board on this occasion. Not that I'm being the sneaky going to the head teachers get the teacher in trouble, but if we don't get decent responses from one level, then that's what you do. You escalate the complaint to the more senior teams, and sometimes boards aren't always as aware as they should be of what the problems are and the fixes, because they're only told what the problems are and the fixes by the person sat in the chief executive seat. And that's not meant to undermine the individual. That's just my experience of working with boards, that they don't always know that there are fixes that could be used, and they're not always suggested to them by the people that are working in the organisation, because sometimes they don't want to do those fixes or they haven't thought of them themselves yet. So the more stuff that you can send me, the more thoughts, the more solutions, the more grist to the mill about what's happening out there and how it's having an impact on your lives and your pupils' lives, the more we can be vocal on this subject and take it to the ears of those who need to hear it. So that was just a bit of a mop up on that specific question that I've had recently from everyone. But yeah, thank you very much, everybody. And I hope you have a great afternoon, and we'll see you on the next webinar.